you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We're just going to give it a couple more seconds to let a few folks come into the virtual room tonight, but thanks for being here. Hello, welcome everyone. We still have a few folks coming in, but we're going to go ahead and get started because these events never seem to last quite long enough. So welcome to everyone to our virtual author talk series here at Atlanta History Center. My name is Claire Haley, and I am the Strategic Communications Director here for the Atlanta History Center and also the coordinator for our wonderful author talk series. So we are absolutely thrilled to be welcoming tonight's guest. So we're welcoming Elizabeth Nyamayaro as she discusses her new memoir, I'm a Girl from Africa, and she will be in conversation tonight with Pat Mitchell. You can purchase a copy of the book tonight from tonight's official bookseller, Acapella Books, and I will be putting a link to do so in the chat here in a minute. And I really encourage you to support Elizabeth on her book launch and to support your local independent bookstore in the process. So Elizabeth and Pat will be taking your questions tonight. You can submit those using the Q&A, and they will get to as many of them as possible. So I'm now going to briefly introduce tonight's speakers before turning it over to Elizabeth to do a short reading. So Elizabeth Nyamayaro is an award-winning humanitarian and former United Nations Senior Advisor on Gender Equality. Born in Zimbabwe, Elizabeth has worked at the forefront of global development for over 2 decades, improving the lives of underserved populations, and she's also held roles at the World Bank, World Health Organization, UNAIDS, and UN Women. I'm a Girl from Africa is her first book, and I think I can speak from all of us for saying, Elizabeth, we really hope it's not your last. She'll be in conversation tonight with Pat Mitchell. Pat is the editorial director of TED Women. Throughout her career as a journalist, Emmy Award-winning producer, and pioneering executive, with a few of those awards you can see there in the background, she's focused on sharing women's stories. She is the chair of Sundance Institute Board, chair emerita of the Women's Media Center Board, and a board member of Participant. She's a trustee of the V-Day Movement, the Skoll Foundation, and Atlanta's Woodruff Arts Center. She has served as a congressional appointment to the American Museum of Women's History Advisory Council. She's the author of Becoming a Dangerous Woman, Embracing Risk to Change the World, and the host of the new Dangerous Woman Leading Forward interview series on FinTech TV. Elizabeth and Pat, thank you so much for being with us this evening, and I'm now going to turn it over to Elizabeth to do a short reading from her book. Thanks again.
We have an African saying that a person is a person through other people. So before I start reading, I want to acknowledge all my friends and family who have joined us today, as well as my colleagues from the United Nations and UN Women, and of course, my great friend, Pat Mitchell, whom you'll get to hear from in a short while. I'm going to read a short passage, and to give you context, this short passage happens when I'm 6 years old. I was born in a small village in Zimbabwe during my country's revolution, which was the struggle to liberate our country from British colonial rule. And when I turned 6, we got independence. And I get to find out this information from my gogo, my grandmother, who was raising me in a small village in Zimbabwe. And a few minutes before this passage, I'm at home all by myself doing chores, as I always used to do. And I hear someone screaming and recognize that it's my gogo screaming. I have no idea what's happening. And so I take off running down the hill, and I see my gogo charging up the hill. She's obviously distressed. and there is dust swirling all over around her, and she's just running, and I don't know what's happening. And so I throw myself in her arms, and this is what happens next. Gogo's knees buckle beneath her. She's gripping me in her arms like a baby. She will not let go, and so we land together on the ground with a thump. My face is pressed against her breast, and my legs stretch out onto the ground. I hear Gogo's heartbeat in my ear. Do-doom, 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 faster and faster, trying to catch a breath as it keeps tumbling away from her. I want to say something, but I don't know what to say. Instead, I throw my tiny arms across her shoulders, trying to comfort her without words, praying silently to God. I want Gogo to stop crying, but instead she opens her mouth and wails. She's sobbing, freeing herself from her sorrow, wailing like a child. I don't understand what has happened, but I want to take Gogo's pain away, the way that she always takes my pain away, protecting me from sickness and hunger and every sadness. I press myself against her and pray, God, please heal her. Gogo says again more clearly this time, the radio announced tasununguka. I still do not understand her meaning, but she's no longer crying, and I want to keep it that way, so I nod and repeat the word in his shoulder. Tasununguka. This is the word Gogo has had on a small radio, which she takes to the field when there's enough money for batteries. We listen to music and weather and news as we work together. I pull away from Gogo and smile at her. She smiles back, then lets out a huge laugh rumbling from deep within her chest that feels as loud as thunder. Still laughing, she lifts me off her lap, sets me onto the ground, and begins to sing and dance like a mad woman. Her bare feet storm the ground with tremendous force. Her arms flap in the air like the powerful birds that soar over the good forest and drop down to steal fish from our river. Gogo's laughter calls light back into her eyes. She's absolutely ecstatic. I think she sounds as hysterical as the hyenas in the hyena forest. Gogo's sudden happiness confuses me as much as her crying did. But I'm relieved that she's happy. And so I join her mad woman dance, following her feet in their 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 pattern. We dance in a wild circle as dust swirls around us, panting as our lungs run out of air. We are laughing with our souls, emptying out all our pain like water being poured into the ground. When Gogo abruptly stopped singing, I stopped with her, fed beads of sweat mixed with dry tears on our faces. I searched Gogo's face for answers. What is happening? She says nothing. Instead, she bends down, locks her hands under my arms, and lifts me off the ground until my feet are dangling in the air. Looking directly into my eyes, she smiles and proclaims loudly, Tasununguka, we are free. We are free, my dear child. We are free. Thank you. And now I'm going to invite Pat to join us.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I love that story because there's so many different levels of meaning, as there are in all the stories in this remarkable book, which I just have to show because beautifully the author is in Africa yellow, and the silhouette, Elizabeth, is the silhouette that I would recognize as you anywhere in the world. our story of how we know each other is that I met her not in Africa, where it would have been possible, since, as Elizabeth knows, I travel there often, but it was in New York City. And
Yes.
Elizabeth, what you were working and running a very important initiative at UN Women, which I want to come back and talk about. But I remember the first night we went for dinner. And as you began to tell me your story, I thought right then, this is a woman who needs to write a book
Yeah.
which tells her personal story because of what meaning it will have for women and men everywhere. So, congratulations on having done this, Elizabeth. And I just really urge everyone who's listening to us to buy the book and read it and lose yourself in the stories of Africa. So,
Well,
there
thank you,
are,
but I do want to quickly acknowledge you as well, because I moved to New York, didn't have any family in the US, and there you were. You literally adopted me, and you also gave me the courage to share my story, because long before this book, the very first time that I felt comfortable telling my own story was with Ted Women, and you coached me and you encouraged me, and I remember feeling so nervous and almost feeling that, why did this story matter? I'm just a girl from Africa. And you reminded me that my story did matter, that my voice had weight. And so again, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge you before we get into this, that I'm partly here because of you, and I hope that you realize that.
well, thank you. And that TED Talk can also be seen on TED.com and has been seen by millions of people all over the
Yeah.
world because the talk, like the book, is a testament to something that I believe deeply and you do as well, Elizabeth. And that is that stories are our bridges to one another. They are the way we learn about each other, about where we come from, where we want to go, our aspirations, our dreams. Storytelling is so essential to the cultural narratives that we build about ourselves. And I look forward to talking more deeply about how you made the selection of the stories that you made to tell in the book. But let's begin with why that particular one that you chose out of all the fabulous stories in the book, why that one to share with our audience this evening?
Well, because I've realized something, that we can't acknowledge that, we can't really move forward with our future if we don't acknowledge where we come from. And even if that means acknowledging the pain that we've experienced in our past. And I think this message has never been more relevant, especially now here in the US, as we reckon with racial inequality. It was very important for me to be able to share with the audience tonight that I have experienced, you know, similar level of pain of being seen as other. And it has taken a lot of us working as a collective in order to be able to move past that pain, past that hate, to be able to build and heal as a collective. Because I was born during my revolution. And by the end of this beautiful passage that I read, of course, we are now independent. But this freedom, it brought with it many challenges, because even though we're finally free, as a country, we're a lot more divided than ever, because one of the devices colonialism used was to split us into different groups, give us different rights, make sure we spoke different languages, so that we were constantly fighting amongst ourselves, and so that they continue to rule over all of us. But it took a lot of learning, and tonight we'll be talking about some of those important, valuable lessons that out of Africa that enabled us to really come together despite our differences and heal as a collective. And I think it's a lesson that perhaps could be of use here in the US as well. So I wanted to start by acknowledging the past so we can move forward.
And how appropriate that we're having this conversation with the Atlanta History
Yeah.
Center, who, in everything they do in the world, reminds us of the importance of, as you say, understanding our past and with all of its sins, revelations, and needs for truth and reconciliation. And in the book, you start every chapter with a proverb that again sets us in a time, a place, an understanding of a people and a time. And one of the great themes is one that you just referenced in everything you just said, which is Ubuntu. Uh, Explain what Ubuntu means to you, and because it has slightly different meanings in each culture. What does it mean to you?
Yes. So Ubuntu is an ancient African philosophy that is very much core to a lot of our African cultures. I mean, Pat is really, she's sort of quasi-African because she spends most of her time as much in the US as she does in Africa. And she understands that Africa is a continent of 55 countries. There's 1.2 billion people living on the continent. We speak more than 2,000 languages. But despite all this diversity, a lot of us hold true to this understanding that we are all connected by our shared humanity, which is what Ubuntu means. It literally translates to I am because we are, and because we are, you are. In other words, I am because you are, and because you are, I am, right? It's this recognition that our humanity binds us and connects us to each other, no matter who we are or where we're from or what we believe. It's not just an African thing. And for me, what's really powerful about this is once you understand this idea of being part of a collective, it also enables us to really look at each other through a lens of humanity, finding the humanity in each other, treating each other with compassion. And what's been remarkable as well, in the past year, it's been very devastating, of course, with the pandemic. But what it has done, it has really reaffirmed this understanding that what impacts one of us will eventually impact all of us. And that the only way we can truly heal is when we heal as a collective, because as long as Pat is unwell, then I'm unwell. And this is what is core at the African cultures, that we are part of a community, that I am because we are, that a person is a person through other persons.
In the book, Elizabeth, you share many stories of how being the other um, is really the source of not only hate, but it is the source of so much of the divisiveness that we are experiencing in this country and all over the world. And how optimistic are you, or what are you observing as someone who now lives in this country, although you will clearly live in both countries always, both cultures always. What are you seeing that gives you hope that we will embrace Ubuntu as a way of living and being together?
Well, I mean, I think it's been remarkable to see movements like the Black Lives Matter organized, but not only them. I think there's now a shared understanding that this pain has to be shared, right? That in order for us to be able to overcome what we're going through is when we all recognize that when we dehumanize others, we also dehumanize ourselves. And this is what's core at Ubuntu. I will tell you a very quick example, in fact, of how Ubuntu was instrumental on my own African continent. So first of all, we had implemented Ubuntu at the end of colonialism. We had a very difficult choice to make, right? Were we going to retaliate against the British colonizers, or were we going to choose a different path? And we decided to evoke our Ubuntu because recognizing that no matter the pain that the British colonizers had caused on us, at the end of the day, they were human beings. And if they were human beings, dehumanizing them would also dehumanize ourselves. And we found a way to really rebuild and find a path through healing in building our own country. But 10 years later, something else remarkable happened. And I think this is much more relevant to what's also, could be applicable here in the US, which was a system of racial segregation, which had been in place for 42 years in South Africa, which is the neighboring country of Zimbabwe, came to an end in 1990. Nelson Mandela became the first African president to lead the country. And again, he was faced with a similar choice. Was he going to retaliate? But no, he didn't do that. He also chose to evoke Ubuntu as a way it's a very powerful tool for reconciliation and peace building. And South Africa was able to rebuild. So I think what is needed here in the US is a similar approach. I think people have to understand that it's not just Black people. We have to advocate for the end of racial inequality. We need allyship. We need solidarity. And this is another thing that's core to Ubuntu, that it's going to take all of us. And I think not unless we do that, then it will remain an issue for the African American community, when in fact it is an issue that impacts all of us as humanity.
And we have to shift the narrative about what we know and believe or think we know and often believe falsely about each other, right? And about each other's cultures. And one of the most infuriating things for me is how little understood those 55 countries that make up the African countries, African continent are, and what lessons there are there. And they all seem to begin with the concept of community. And the COVID crisis, which, as you said, reminded us of the interconnectedness of wherever we are, wherever we live in the world. But on the African continent, there were all these dire predictions of what would happen. And it didn't happen nearly as devastatingly as it happened in this country and others. And let's talk about that. How do we shift the narrative and the knowledge that is actually known about the African continent?
So I'm actually going to start with going back to the beginning. This book, this title is a declaration of who I am. It's a declaration of who we are as Africans. People who are not defined by the enormity of our challenges, but by our resilience and strength in overcoming them, working together as children of the African soil, as it was. What's interesting for me is that the reason why I named this book, I'm a Girl from Africa, was to also try and shift the misperception of the continent. You know, Africa is not a country, and that is often the perception that it is a country. So when one dire thing is happening in one country, we tend to dismiss an entire continent of 55 countries, which of course is not the right way to do. So in coming up with the title, I also wanted to tackle this issue, Pat, which you rightly raised in terms of even how people responded to the COVID. There was, first of all, before we even, got into the entire how was Africa going to address it, there was a prediction that this was going to be catastrophic for Africa because Africans are not educated, so they are not going to understand what to do, they are not going to implement anything, and they're all going to perish, right? And then, of course, COVID hit, and the opposite was noted, because we actually saw Africa, and there were reports even on the BBC and CNN talking about how actually Africa was one continent that had done really well in terms of being responsive. And this really stemmed from this understanding of the collective. We knew as Africans that when they said this requires all of us, we knew exactly what to do. We knew to wear masks. You were telling me your story, you were in Kenya, in the middle of COVID, and you said you couldn't even imagine seeing anyone without wearing a mask. We knew this. We knew this, and so responded effectively. We had also overcome other challenges, including the Ebola crisis, which devastated West Africa, in the early 2000s. And again, we were able to work together as a collective to address the pandemic, and of course the existing infrastructure. I mean, a very simple thing, when we had Ebola, we immediately learned that we're not going to handshake, right? We would say hello with the elbow, and so when COVID hit, we kind of implemented the existing tools that we had learned from the previous pandemic, and obviously this really supported us being able to overcome as a continent. But yes, indeed, I think there's often this misperception that, we don't know what we're doing, and yet we'll find time and time again that Africans actually do have solutions to their own challenges, as we've seen with this pandemic and many others.
And let's hope that many of those lessons that Africans have known and put into place in their lives and their communities come to this country. And as you referenced, I traveled there in the middle of COVID, and everyone was saying, "What? You're going to Africa? Oh my gosh, you'll be in such danger." Well, I felt so much safer there in Kenya because, as you say, the absolute regard people have for each other's safety and taking care of each other. So that value, you can't overestimate the importance of community. What were the other values, Elizabeth, that as you came to this country, first to Europe and then to this country, making your way in the world as someone who had gone through enormous challenges to get to these opportunities in the Europe and in America? What values did you bring forward that are responsible for the success that you've now had in your life?
The spirit of never ever giving up, which is what my gogo, my grandmother, who raised me in a small African village, taught me from a very young age, because I had this dream to work for the United Nations. Yet I was this small girl in a small village, and it almost seemed impossible. Like, how was this ever going to happen? But because of my gogo and the sort of fierce determination that she raised me with, she herself had been a freedom fighter in the struggle to liberate our country. And I knew that I couldn't give up because there was so much to lose by me doing that. Another core aspect of Ubuntu is really recognizing that when you are part of a collective, I remember my gogo sitting me down when I was about 6 years old, and she said, there's a way to dream as part of your Ubuntu values. And she said, you have to dream a big that's big enough for all of us, big enough for all Africans. And your dream can be for one, but it can be for many. And so I knew that, despite the obstacles that I faced along the way in trying to achieve my dream, that my dream was bigger than just for me. It was a dream for my community. And that gave me the power to keep going, the determination to really pretty much overcome the greatest obstacles in order to achieve that dream. So I think the spirit of being an African and the optimism that comes with it, really enables me even now to keep going when things seem rather challenging.
And I don't want to give away all the amazing stories that you share in the book because I want people to read it for so many reasons. But there is that one apocryphal story, really, where everything changed for you. I would like to ask you to share that story.
Yeah. So one minute I'm living in this beautiful village because we are part of a community. And so being part of a community literally meant that we took care of each other. We lived off our land. We grew our food together. There was an abundance of food when I was growing up. And we also, the land held so much more meaning for us. It wasn't just a source of food, but it was also the way through which we maintained our dignity and pride, right? Because we knew that we could always take care of each other. But then suddenly when I turned 8, everything changed. A severe drought hit our village and literally left us with nothing to eat or drink. And I remember one day just feeling so weak, and I collapsed on the ground and I couldn't get up. And in my young mind, I actually thought I was going to die. But then this incredible miracle happened. A girl in a blue uniform found me. She was an African girl. I'd never met her before. She wasn't from my village, but she was African like me. And she gave me a bowl of porridge, and that bowl of porridge saved my life. And I found out 2 years later that this girl in the blue uniform was an aid worker with the United Nations. And so just like me now, she had decided that she was going to uplift her own community, ended up working as a humanitarian. And because of her dream, she dared to dream a dream for others. She was able to save my life. And I immediately thought, that's who I want to be. I too want to be just like her, so that maybe one day I can save the lives of others in a similar way that my life had been saved. So that was a very pivotal moment for me.
And you did that. I mean, many of us might have those kind of revelations or aspirations, not in the same way as you did, but as young women and young girls and boys, we dream of what we want to be. But for you, it became more than just a dream. It became a driving goal, an objective, and you stayed with it even in the toughest times. Talk about that, how you got through those times of no money, no place to stay, doors closing, and what kept you going forward to be the dream that you would do something that would serve others?
What my community did, right? Because I knew that achieving my dream would also help uplift their lives. So the long story short is, in my 20s, I decided that I was going to go chase this dream in the UK. My grandmother sold a few of her cows and goats and bought me a ticket because I didn't have enough money to do that. And I remember getting off the plane at London Heathrow Airport one morning with only 250 pounds to my name. I didn't know anyone in the UK, no friends or family, but I had this dream that I was just going to be there and achieve my dream and work for the United Nations. But then alas, everything fell apart. Like with most dreams, I think there are always hurdles along the way. What I thought was the United Nations office in London was in fact not the United Nations office. Even though it was called the United Nations Association, it was a completely different entity, an NGO that was set up to promote the work of the UN. And of course, everything fell apart. I found myself living in a very filthy youth hostel. At some point, I ran out of money. I almost became homeless because I was almost thrown out. But then I decided that I couldn't give up because I'd come such a long way. And I actually ended up working as a janitor in this hostel so that I could do that in exchange for rent, so that I could just keep there and keep, driving towards my dream. And of course, with hard work, I eventually got a job. Initially, it was very difficult because back to this, misperception of the continent, it was the first time that I realized that people held this preconceived notion about Africa and our people that were in complete contradictions to who we are and how we see ourselves. I remember watching British television and how Africans were portrayed as helpless, aimlessly walking around refugee camps, waiting to be saved. And that also created a dynamic whereby just even the hiring managers, when they found out that I was African, they kind of looked down upon me and saw me as lesser than. But again, I decided that I wasn't going to give up. And eventually, my dream came I got a job. I ended up putting myself in university, and I became a humanitarian. I became the girl in the blue uniform.
And when we met many years later, you had already returned to Africa and run a very important AIDS program. You had already begun the humanitarian work that led you to the position in New York. And there, with UN Women, you took all of these values and all of this aspiration to serve others and focused on women and gender equality, which we still do not have anywhere in the world, we should point out, although we are hoping to secure global agreements on that this summer. But you started an initiative there that so deeply touched me and brought me into the process, and one I'd like you to talk about because we still need it so desperately.
Yeah.
And it was called He for She. Talk about that, and what part of that was controversial?
What part of it wasn't controversial is more the question. I mean, the reality is that my colleagues and I at UN Women, I think we had gotten to a point where we were frustrated with hearing the same, really difficult questions around every time when something happens to a woman. Right now, 1 in 3 girls in the world, including here in the US, will experience some form of violence in their lifetime. And every time when something like that happens, the same really useless questions are asked. What was she wearing? What was she doing by herself all at night? And yet the question should be, why are men doing that? How can men be engaged to understand that this is not the right thing to do? And so the foundation of the He for She movement was very much informed by Ubuntu. Our boss at UN Women, a phenomenal woman whom Pat knows as well, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, she was a former freedom fighter from South Africa. She fought in the anti-apartheid movement. She was then appointed on Mandela's cabinet and was part of implementing Ubuntu as a tool for reconciliation at the end of apartheid. So she had lived Ubuntu herself. She had implemented and she understood the power of Ubuntu. So together with our shared experience and with the support of our colleagues, we really decided to evoke Ubuntu because we also realized that for a very long time, the issue of gender inequality has been seen as an issue that impacts women, led by women for women, as if to say men don't have a gender. And the reality also being that, if men are the perpetrators of most of these issues, then they have to be part of the solution. They have to be able to examine their privilege and be part of creating true societies of equality. The controversy, which I fully understood as a feminist as well, was that because men have often been the perpetrators and they have been perceived as the people holding back progress, some traditional feminists really felt embittered by their engagement, because we are where we are because of all the struggles we've experienced trying to deal with this power dynamic that exists when it comes to gender inequality, where men still hold the majority of power across all levels of society. So it became very controversial, but we knew with my colleagues that this was the right thing to do. And so we ended up creating the He for She movement. We invited men to be part of the movement. And literally within 3 days, there was at least one man in every single country in the world who had joined He for She. And within that first week, there was 1.2 billion online conversations. So I think it was a message that was at the right time, because there were quite, and I do believe there are still quite a few men out there who do want to do the right thing. But as Pat said, I mean, we are far from where we need to be. I mean, just if you listen to all the things happening right now, we still need more allies.
And He for She movement gave men a role to play in being even more than allies, being advocates. And so many men step forward to take that responsibility too. And we are the UN, with UN Women's Leadership and Fumzili, the executive director, we are moving everything towards the hope that we can get a global agreement again, as we had 25 years ago in Beijing, that every country, every company will make it a priority to enforce and implement gender equality. Are you more optimistic after your experiences with He for She that we will get there, that we will realize it's not a win-lose game here? This is a win-win game for men and women?
I think we have to remain optimistic, right? Because otherwise, what choice do we have? But I think the optimism has been meshed with the work. We have to galvanize people. And Pat, we are where we are. I mean, I speak as a younger person, that we stand on your shoulders. You have been leading this work for a very, very long time. And I think we have to carry on passing on the baton to the next generation. I think as a collective we can do it, but I think it's going to require not just women, but all genders working together as a collective. Because otherwise, I mean, we know this already, the current rate of progress is very slow. It would take another 100 years if we carry on the way that we are, if we carry on making it a woman's issue and excluding, other genders from participating. So the only way it can be truly achieved is by working together, because no one is ever going to be truly equal until we're all equal. And we have to continue to make that case. And as you say, ask for firm commitments. We are tired of the talk. We know what the challenges are, but we just need to get the work done, because we know what needs to happen. We have to remove the glass ceiling so women can thrive in the corporate world. We need equal pay for equal work. These are very simple things. We put money in the hands of women. We can uplift communities in a way that we haven't seen before. We need to make sure that girls have access to education. Right now, 130 million girls are out of school because of the COVID pandemic. So we know what needs to be done. We just need everybody to actually work together as a collective to get it done.
You sound as impatient as I am.
Yes.
And I'm several decades older, and have been in the struggle for a long time. But I'm impatient for it because I know how much better the world is, and how the contribute. You can't ignore the contributions of half of the world's populations.
No.
Brain power. Nor can we ignore the contributions of what Africa as a continent has to teach us as well. And in that way, I welcome the lessons that you have brought forward in your life. So being, as you describe yourself, an impatient optimist as well. How are you carrying that out now into the work? It's so easy to get discouraged, particularly with the racial reckoning and the lack of gender equality, what keeps you going every day?
The realization that I am part of a collective, I take that very seriously. And that if I want to live in a better world, in a more just, more equal, more sustainable world, then I have to be part of creating that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to have all the answers, because I don't, or try and solve for all the issues, because I will never do that. I mean, it's overwhelming because it's quite a lot. But I think all of us, I think this is the biggest lesson in this book as well, and why I wanted to share my story, is to show people the power that we all have to create change. Some of the greatest heroes I've witnessed are in communities around the world, people living below the poverty line, people whose everyday life is a struggle for survival. And yet they find it within themselves to do one small act of compassion, one small act of kindness for their neighbor, or someone in their own community. And that's how they're uplifting each other, because we can only rise by uplifting those around us. So how I keep myself motivated, I take one issue at a time. I look at what is the one issue that I'm really passionate about. And of course, gender remains that. As you said, it's half of the world's population. I mean, if we fix that, I think we can fix so many other challenges. But I would encourage all of us to do that. And as an incentive, because Pat spoke about the Proverbs in the book, one of the Proverbs that is in there talks exactly about this, that none of us are too small to make a difference. Because if you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending a night in a room with a mosquito, right? A mosquito can create a whole lot of noise. And so that's my encouragement, that, this inspires all of us to find just the one thing that you can do in your own community to uplift those around you.
Let's take that one step further, because there is a question in the Q&A. And by the way, encourage everyone listening to us to put questions into the Q&A. I'm trying to keep up with them. But there is one that is so easy when you listen to you, and with your great sense of self, and what is clearly successful, achieve so many of your goals and dreams and ambitions. But what do you say to the people who see you, but who still feel they don't have the internal resilience, or they don't have the power or the access to the power? They feel powerless. How do you encourage them?
I mean, first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that. And, it's okay also not to be okay. And there are moments when I doubt myself. And it's part of the process. I think being able to be truthful with your emotions, because mental health also matters. Again, I think power comes in different forms, right? I recognize that right now I'm able to speak with eloquence about the things that I do, because I have been working as a senior advisor at the United Nations. But one of the things that you'll find in the book as well is that long before I joined the UN, I was volunteering in HIV/AIDS clinic in my own community. I was going around just supporting people that were impacted, communities that were impacted. I had no power. I didn't have a fancy job title. I wasn't getting paid to do it. I was just doing it because I felt it was my responsibility as part of our collective humanity. And so, again, I would say, I think be truthful with yourself in terms of what it is that you want to accomplish. It maybe doesn't start as something very big, but we just got to start somewhere. And what's remarkable right now as well is that you actually don't have to start anything on your own. One of the incredible things that have come out of this moment of unrest is that there's more and more organizations, civil society trying to be part of creating change. And so you can simply volunteer. Maybe it's just, it's once a week. You can, if you're in a position to donate, you can donate. But also, if you're in college and you still haven't decided what you want to do with your life, being a humanitarian can be quite interesting, because you are able to give back. And that there's almost a cycle. The more you give back, and Pat, you know this more than anyone else, you're one of the biggest givers that I know, the more you also feel good about yourself, the more you feel uplifted to do more. So it's a cycle, and we need more humanitarians in the world. So I'm going to make a plea here for anyone listening who wants to be able to part of creating change, that there's always room for you to be part of that.
That's such a good message. And I would just add to it, amplifying what you've already said, that if you're feeling powerless, the very best thing you can do is get off the sidelines
Yeah.
and get engaged. But you can't make change sitting and observing. You can
Yeah.
only make change by being in the game, right?
Yeah.
And that it was such good advice. To take home, to get in, be a part of it. That's how change happens.
Yeah.
And there
Be
are
a part of something bigger than yourself. Then it's no longer about yourself, right? Because if you make it too much about yourself, then you can wallow in your own misery, because obviously it's very difficult to do something on your own. But if you're part of something that's bigger than yourself, that allyship, that camaraderie. I mean, Pat has been organizing women marches, and they still happen. UN Women does this every year. Join the march, do something. But yeah, but all you can't, the only one thing you can't do is remain silent.
That's so true. And there's another great African proverb. You know it as well, which says, "Begin the work where you are planted."
Yeah.
So often it means just look around.
Yeah.
There's so much work that needs to be done. And in many ways, that's how your journey began, was
Yeah.
looking around, seeing what you yourself had experienced as oppression and barriers being thrown up, and start there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you are thinking of starting some really important work, and that is looking at the continent again as this enormous global resource of young people.
Yeah.
I mean, they describe it as a youth bomb almost. There are 60 to 70% of the populations in
Yeah.
some African countries are under the age of 18.
Yeah.
So talk about that work and what you hope to accomplish in working with the young people on the continent.
Yeah, so Africa has an enormous potential. We have right now the youngest youth population in the world is in Africa, soon to become the largest youth population in the world. And again, as an African, it was really heartbreaking for me to see young Africans die at sea as they are crossing the Mediterranean, looking for better opportunities elsewhere, just because they feel that they can't find the opportunities on the continent. Yet we also know that actually we need our own, we need Africans to be involved in reshaping our own continent. And there has been so much brain drain as it is, Pat, as you know, on the African continent, young people escaping because of this, lack of opportunities. And the work that I've been trying to do is to try and work on youth empowerment on the continent. It is very early days. I was supposed to, launch an initiative at the beginning of last year. And of course, COVID happened and everything changed. But the bottom point to this is that I firmly believe that Africa has the solutions that it needs. We have the resources that we need to really uplift our continent in a big way. But that requires us investing in the youth of the continent. We should also not be surprised when people leave, right? Because at the end of the day, people are just simply trying to survive. But what is also promising for me, and something that we don't often talk about in the media, is that even in the current status, of course, Africa does benefit a lot from Western aid, but year in, year out, the World Bank, they do a study on the amount of remittances going into the continent from the diaspora community. And every single year, it continues to outweigh all East and West combined. So Africans, even when we do leave the continent, we are investing back home. We are building our economies. And I hope I can be part of, creating more of those opportunities on the ground for those who want to stay on the continent, those who want to be there and actually create the change. So that's the work that I'm hoping to do, and I'm planning on doing. And it's a way to make a personal investment in my continent, because we have another African saying, to whom so much is given, so much is expected, and so much has been given to me in a very big way.
I'm sure there are people who have joined us for this conversation, Elizabeth, um, who maybe had not seen the huge opportunities that the African continent offers for solutions.
Yeah.
So many of our problems, food security, climate change, violence against women and girls, there's so many things that are being worked out on the African continent. And you are such an advocate for that. And do you see ways, and are you hopeful that in this country we can create stronger ties? We can really pull those lessons forward and work more closely together as a global community.
Well, I hope so, because also what's interesting, it's not just about what Africa can give to the world, but it's actually what we can give to each other. Because even when you talk about the issue of climate change, our behavior and our lifestyle in the West also impacts Africa in a significant way. Climate change has hit us in such a big way on the continent, and we know that we are not the biggest producer of some of the emission that are causing some of these challenges. And so it's really recognizing, and I think treating each other as equals, right? Which is one of the things that we don't often see. We are seen as a recipient, and yet I firmly believe that Africa has contributed and can even do more to contribute to the world, even starting with this Ubuntu, right? I think Ubuntu could be one of the greatest gifts that Africa gives to the world. It's been quite remarkable for me to see how people feel so isolated because of the current COVID pandemic. And I continuously get questions like, well, how would you remain so optimistic? And I always say, well, because I know that I'm part of a community. I know that if I'm to fall, someone will catch me. And I know that that's not always the case. Living in a big city like New York City, I remember like the neighbors not even wanting to be in the same elevator with me or with the other neighbor, like almost avoiding any level of contact. And it's quite a sad way to live, right? Because then you do feel isolated, and you do feel like you're alone, and you can feel overwhelmed. So I think that could be one powerful way, but also even just as you said, I mean, the resources that we give to the world, whether that's in terms of even our youth and the brain power that comes with that. So, but it should really be a symbiotic thing. I don't believe that Africa can solve its own challenges all by itself. I think we need to lead and inform that change, but we do need partnership. We need allyship just as much as the West needs Africa.
And that's really the purpose, I think, or the intention, intended or not, that comes from this book, Elizabeth. That must have been in your mind as you were sharing your personal stories and your journey. You were seeing those connections, right?
Yes.
That
No,
need to be strengthened.
yes. No, indeed, Pat, I was, because it was very difficult for me actually to get into the mindset of writing a memoir. I tend to be a very private person. Apart from the TED Talk, I don't usually want to talk about myself. So then my middle ground of this was like, I'm going to use my story, but to tell a bigger story of my continent, to share with people and really unpack this beautiful continent that I'm so proud to call home. And also to give other young African girls the opportunity to see what's possible for themselves, right? That where we are born doesn't have to limit our potential and the dream of our potential, but also that actually where we are born is the best part of who we are. Actually, you don't realize this as a young child. You are often embarrassed about being a girl from X. It's not just for Africa. I'm a girl from X, and therefore I feel lesser than. But there's a rallying call as well with this book that says, this is really a book about a girl from X and being able for her to see a potential to get to Y, and that we can all do that, and embracing that and being proud of that.
Boy, that is reason enough for everyone listening to us to pick up this book and read it and share it. The lesson of this, because that really is what you say, Elizabeth, and what your life stands for. Wherever you come from, however rural, however isolated, however disconnected, how powerless and lack of influence that you may feel you have or will ever have, it's possible to
Yeah,
build
but
a life that serves others.
but also you inspire me, Pat, because you're also, if I don't mind me saying, you're also a girl from Georgia, right? you're a girl
Rural
from
Georgia.
rural, you're a girl from rural Georgia, and look what you've been able to do in terms of giving back and uplifting other women. And again, it just really shows that, where we're born is really the best part of who we are, and we may not realize that at the time. And but also that it should not limit our destiny or diminish our dreams. We can dream big, and with hard work and faith, um, everything is possible. And with your community, certainly everything is possible.
Everything is possible. And certainly, I am a girl from Africa says that. So now you've done the memoir, you've shared the stories, you will inspire so many, many, many people, women and men, to remember that wherever we come from, anything and everything is possible, particularly if we're driven by the need to serve others.
Others, yeah,
So what
because if your dream benefits you, it will. If your dream benefits others, it will ultimately benefit you. That's what my gogo told me.
that is a wonderful thing to hold close in our
Mm.
hearts. What then is next? I mean, it's we talked a little bit about the plan, may, hopefully post COVID, to go back to Africa and begin the youth work. But there must be a dream in Elizabeth Nyamaro's head about what's next.
Well, as you know, my husband, he's always talking about how you. First of all, you and I apparently we're always searching for impact, and so I think it's going to be that. I think once a humanitarian, always a humanitarian. I'm continuously going to be looking for opportunities to create more impact, and looking really at issues where we have communities that feel the most marginalized. I think the issue of gender inequality is something that it really just has to come to a point where it's achievable. Because I mean, how long can we continue to do this, Pat? It just seems it seems like we need this inflection point, and it's going to require all of us pulling in the same direction. And I remain hopeful as you spoke about the commitments of the governments coming in later this year. So I think that's where I'll be focused, wherever I can be of service to others, to causes that will move our humanity forward, is really the thing that I'm most excited about.
And just to remind everyone so that they will be tracking this, the 25 years ago, the UN convened the Forum in Beijing on women, and it was there we heard women's rights or human rights. And now that conference will be reconvened virtually, probably this
Yes.
summer, with the goal of generation equality, meaning it's time. It's
Yeah.
time now to create a world in which all of the dreams and aspirations of women and all the opportunities are open to bring about as much change as possible. Africa also, for me, when I think of one of the most important initiatives, was the Truth and Reconciliation hearing. It really did change history, not
Yeah.
just in one country, but in many countries. Do you see the possibility of a Truth and Reconciliation hearing in this country coming to terms with our history and moving forward more together towards a united future?
I hope so. I hope so. I think though what needs to happen is the acknowledgement of what has happened. A lot of my friends from the African American community have expressed to me that, a part of the challenge right now is the continuous devaluing of lives of people of color, right? That our lives are not valued in the same way. And we have to constantly say, I can't breathe before someone takes notice. So I think, again, it's quite emotional to talk about this, by the way, but we have to keep pushing for it to be a reality, because the status quo is not working. It's just not working. We can't live in fear because of the color of our skin. I even remember, Pet, as a sidebar, you were writing your book, I'm a Dangerous Woman, and you had asked me to be part of this. And I remember having this moment of, can I be can I actually call myself a dangerous woman? I would love to, because I know what it means when you talk about that, because it's a very empowered way. It's someone who's disrupting status quo, someone who wants to create change that will benefit others. But I looked at the color of my skin and I said, well, no, I can't do that, because the reason why we're being killed is because we're perceived to be dangerous, simply because of the shade of our skin. I mean, that's unacceptable on so many levels. And so we cannot give up. I mean, it's a lot of work that's going to need to happen, but we need the allyship on the other side. MLK said this a long time ago. It's not about us just protesting. We need the allies. We need people who don't look like us getting as much worked out about this and organizing marches in honor of the justice that needs to take place. So I remain hopeful, but I think the country is a lot more divided, and so the work is just more. But hopefully we can continue a dialogue. I think we can get to a place where, you know, these things can start to happen. I think, you know, you are such a great advocate for communication and conversation, and we need to have the conversation.
Well, I'm so glad we had this conversation tonight, Elizabeth. Yeah. Thank you for the conversation, for reminding us that we are because you are because we are. That is where we begin. We should begin all our conversations and all our work. And you'll read the manifestation of that in I Am a Girl from Africa. Read the book, and thank you for joining us for tonight's conversation.
Thank you so much, Pat, and thank you everyone for tuning in.
Well, thank you so much, Pat and Elizabeth, for that just riveting conversation. I know I feel like I'm ready to just run out of the door and start doing something. So if you haven't yet read the book, y'all, I really can't stress it enough. It's wonderful. In the back, Elizabeth includes an appendix about if you're interested in certain issues, humanitarian issues that she raises in the book. She gives you resources to learn more about that. So that's another really great aspect of it. So highly encourage you to purchase it, preferably from Acapella Books, our official bookseller for tonight's event, and our local Atlanta independent bookstore. So if you enjoyed tonight's conversation, we have a lot coming up in the month of May that I'm very excited about. So finishing out April on Wednesday, we'll be welcoming David Stewart. I'm in conversation with Kevin Butterfield, and that's about his new biography of George Washington. It's about his political identity, the founding father you often hear referred to as apolitical in some ways. So it's a really interesting take on his life. And then on May 4th, we're going to be welcoming Atlanta area author Anjali Enjeti for her book, The Parted Earth, and she'll be in conversation with GPB's Virginia Prescott. It's her debut novel, so it'd be really great for her to have a great crowd supporting her for her book launch. So again, Elizabeth, Pat, thank you so much for your conversation this evening, and I hope that you both have a wonderful, wonderful evening, and everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us. Bye.
Thank you for hosting us. Mm-hmm.